Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel and welcome to the second installment of Booktuber recommendations. That's right, last time I read 5 things recommended to me by Michael from Fit to Be Read and had a great time with it. And today we have recommendations from none other than the venerable Scott Danielson, who has been taking steps away from booktube videos to meditate peacefully in the forest, I'm sure. Tranquil hills of Utah. And, his insightfulness is always very valuable. If you've never watched Scott Danielson, I'll link to his blog down below, where I believe he's still doing some active things, as well as the podcast that he co-hosts, which is fantastic and really, really worth your time to take some time and listen to. So even if he never does return back to actively booktubing, and I can't blame him for the decisions he's making on that, there's still incredible value that he provides to the bookish community. And it's thanks to none other than Steve Donahue that I even got introduced to Scott Danielson. We did last summer, the Summer of the Cimmerils, where we went through the Silmarillion, the three of us as co-hosts, and read it in the month of July, and had a great time. And since then, I've grown to know Scott quite a bit better, and he is one of my go-to sources for recommendations on anything, or insight on anything. And so, as a reminder, what I ask the booktuber is for a recommendation of a novel, a novella, a short story, a poem, and a graphic novel. And they're free to recommend as many or as few as will fit into those categories. And so he chose not to do a graphic novel. So the poem he recommended was Sweet Darkness by David Whyte. And it was a really, really enjoyable poem. Short, to the point. If I had had a little bit more time, I probably would have done a Poetry Thursday video for it. I might still do that next week. I do have a return of Poetry Thursday. But really, really good, solid poem. One that I absolutely enjoyed. And he did mention in passing that there's a couple other David Whyte poems that he really enjoys. So I'm going to try to wheedle those out of him so I can go and read and enjoy those as well. The short story he recommended to me was a Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. And you might think that English major, I've probably read that, and I hadn't. If I had, it was long enough ago that I didn't remember it at all. In fact, I read it twice, because at the end, I was so taken aback by what was, to me, an unexpected ending, that I had to go back through and reread it about a week later. And I saw more. I appreciated more. And then after talking to Scott, he sent me a Voxer message where he went on a little bit more about the story and what he's gotten from it. And my goodness, this story is like an onion. It's got layers. And I don't think it'll ever become a favorite story of mine. But it is one that I think I'm going to appreciate more and more every time I get back to that story. But I already knew from last year that Flannery O'Connor is possibly not a good author fit for me, because I read Wise Blood and did not enjoy the experience at all. And so this was definitely much better than Wise Blood. A lot more enjoyable, a lot shorter. And good, as a whole. Really, really solid short story. And I'm thankful and happy to have gotten that recommendation. For the novella, he recommended to me The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. And it was interesting. It kind of bounces back and forth between two POVs. One that is far more interesting than the other. And it's hard to see early on the direction this is going. In fact, about halfway through, I was like, I just don't know what this is trying to accomplish, especially because of the bouncing back and forth. And when I got towards the end and I could finally start to see hints of the direction that Ted Chiang was going to go with this, I had that aha moment of, okay, I get it now. I understand why it's a good novella, why it's highly regarded, why I believe it was award-winning. Because it's setting the groundwork to ponder the idea of whether or not, if you knew the absolute outcome of the decisions you were making, would you still make those decisions knowing that they led to some sort of tragedy along the way? In this case, a mother with a child who she knows she is going to outlive. Would she trade all of that away to save herself from that heartbreak? And the way it's crafted is just masterfully done. You get hints that this mother has outlived her child pretty early in there. And it's just really interesting ideas. I think it was the first Ted Chiang I actually read. I know it's in a big collection. I got used my ebook loan service through the library to check out the ebook just to read that novella. I didn't read any of the rest of the stories that were in there because I'm on this 500 book challenge, and as much as I enjoy reading these recommendations, I didn't want to spend more time on Ted Chiang than I needed to because I need to get back to the other things that I'm reading. And that leads me to the novel. And this is the one that makes me smile. This is the recommendation of recommendations from the list. In the same way that on Michael's list, his novel recommendation was by far the most enjoyable thing because he recommended to me Sea of Rust, and that is a contender for one of my favorite reads this year. And the same is true about Scott's recommendation on the novel. Also a science fiction novel, but a very different kind of science fiction novel. So where Sea of Rust is robots and more kind of action-oriented science fiction in a dystopian setting, we have Spin by Robert Charles Wilson. And this is about big ideas. Oh my goodness. Big ideas. 3 teenagers are outside on a night when all of a sudden the stars disappear from the sky. The moon disappears from the sky. And the whole world has changed because of it. And half of the story is spent trying to figure out the mystery of what all has gone on from this. What has caused this? What are the ramifications of this? And there are some huge reveals that take place in here that I really don't want to spoil for you. If you have never read this and you have any interest at all in science fiction, this is a fantastic book. Not too bogged down in science to where you need to have a deep understanding of anything in order to be able to follow what's going on. Because I certainly don't have that background, and I was able to follow a lot of what was being talked about because our main character is a friend of the really smart science people. He's more of a physician, a doctor, and a very close friend. So he's on the in on a lot of it, but gets a lot of explanation from things, or is taking time to explain things back to them to demonstrate that he knows what it is that they're talking about. This also has a little bit of jumping around of viewpoints in terms of on a timeline. And there's payoff for that towards the end. You know, And like anything where you've got jumping around, you've got multiple timelines or more multiple characters that are separated apart. The real question is, when it all comes together, does it pay off? And in this one, it absolutely did. The ideas paid off. The characters, you come to know them, you come to really enjoy them. And the way this one ends, I know there's a trilogy of these books. As you can see, this was a library loan, an interlibrary loan. That's why it's got these fun little colorful pieces of paper on there. So I even had to put in a request from one of my local libraries to track down a copy at a different library and bring it in. I know there's 2 other books in the series, and I absolutely want to read them. Unfortunately, because this is not a book I own, it does not count towards my 500 book challenge. Which stinks. I mean, I willingly was reading it, even knowing that. But knowing that I spent all that time between that and the Ted Chiang and made 0 progress, it sucks. Thankfully, the next Booktuber recommendation that I'm doing is from Anne with a Book. And she recommended a book that actually happens to be on my shelf. So I'm very, very excited about that. Because it's going to give me a reason to visit a book that is currently sitting on my shelf and continue to make that progress. So I'm going to probably roll into that here shortly. I've got a couple other books that I'm wrapping up. I, Claudius, Death World. And then I'm going to be rolling right into Anne's recommendations because they're medieval. And I'm feeling medieval right now. Have some very, very strong inclinations to want to go into some medieval books. But anyway, Scott Danielson gave me some fantastic recommendations, and I couldn't be happier with the results. I had a fantastic time reading. In fact, I don't have to take it back for another week and a half, but I just couldn't put it down in the last couple of days. It was the book that I was grabbing every time I needed to do some reading. And I have no regrets for that because it paid off in spades. So really, really, really good book. And I can't recommend it highly enough. So thank you to Scott. And thank you in advance to Anne for the recommendations for me for my next set of Booktuber recommendations. And now that I've got another one knocked off, maybe you will be the Booktuber I'm reaching out to for some recommendations, because I've got I'm trying to keep a steady queue of a couple in my pocket so that I can make my way through them alongside my 500 books on my Read What You Own challenge. So until next time, thank you very much for watching. I'm glad that you're here, and stay tuned because I'll be talking about dangerous visions in my next video, and as I get closer to that halfway point. And I've got some things to say about this anthology.